everyone, so today I am here to do my November wrap-up. In the month of November, I think I read 22 books, maybe 23, let me check. This month I read 21 books, but I got halfway through another, so that would have been 22. But yeah, so today I'm just going to be talking about the books that I read in November. I read a whole ton of different types of books. I read some for class. I read a ton of nonfiction for #NonFictionNovember, which I'm so proud of myself for. You guys know I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but I've been trying to get back in, or not back into it. I keep saying back into it. I never was into it. I'm trying to get into reading it, and I think this month I really succeeded with that. And then I read a whole ton of just other books. I guess I'm just gonna kind of go in order of the way that, in the order that I read them, so let's get into it. So first up, I read Three Women by Lisa Taddeo, and this is a nonfiction story that the author basically followed and interviewed these three women about their lives and then wrote the book, and it follows the three women during their lives. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about this book, I left this book absolutely loving it and gave it 5 stars, and then a bunch of people were saying that the reason that people weren't liking this book was it was marketed as a book about women's desire, and that is so not what this book is about. This book is about women's trauma. At least I would say so. I would say that this book is about women's trauma when it comes to sex and sexuality, but apparently it was marketed as a book about women's desire and sex. And I think if you go into it thinking it's like that, it's not a good book. But if you go into it thinking about it as just women's lives and women's trauma and sex and everything, I think it's a lot better. But yeah, I did really enjoy this, and I really enjoyed the 3 different stories. I liked each of them very equally, which doesn't usually happen. I thought it was just a really interesting story and a really great way to kick off my personal nonfiction reading this month, because it was very narrative-esque, like very narrative based, and which makes it a lot easier to read for me personally. So yeah, I did like this a lot, and I gave it 5 stars when I finished it, but maybe I'd bump it down to 4 stars just because of how it was supposed to be marketed. Didn't really match up with how it actually, like what it was actually about. And then for my class, we finally finished Paradise Lost by John Milton. Yeah, holy shit, can you see all of those annotations and stuff? Oh my gosh. This was a lot. It was a lot. Yeah, basically I'm in a Milton seminar and we had to read this. We read this for like a month and a half and it was a lot. I didn't love it. I will say that I am very influenced by how much I enjoy class with how much I enjoy the literature we read in it, and I hate this class. I hate this class. It is so boring and so awful and just the worst part of my week every week. So maybe I would have enjoyed this a lot more if I just read it on my own, but I gave this like a 3 star. The premise is cool, like the whole story behind it is cool, but like how we analyzed it and looked at it and discussed it was so boring. So it definitely dulled my enjoyment of this book. Plus we read it over for such a long time. It was too drawn out. So yeah, I gave it a 3 star. Alright, and then I read some more nonfiction. Yeah, I told you guys I read a whole bunch of nonfiction. First off, we have The Magical Language of Others by E.J. Ko, or Ko Eun-ji, and this is her memoir that was very interestingly told basically through her relationship with her mother. Ko Eun-ji is a Korean-American girl. Her family's Korean immigrants, but she was born in America, and basically it kind of starts when her parents leave her to live with her older brother and they go back to South Korea for a long time, and kind of, again, it tells the story through her relationship with her mother. I thought this was fantastic. I thought it was really beautiful, really interestingly told, and I really liked it. Yeah, I would give this like a 4 star. It was really interesting. I really liked all the, like, again, how it was told, like through her mom basically. And then I also read We Are Dancing for You by Kucha Riesling Baldi, and this was for my thesis, and this basically looks at Indigenous women and their culture and how they're portrayed in society and everything, and the different things about like women specifically in Indigenous tribes and culture. And I really like this. I gave this like a 4, maybe a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was really interesting and very informative. And then I also read At Home in Japan by Rebecca Otawa. Rebecca Otawa is a a Japanese American woman who married into a Japanese family, and she like went to Japan and lives there and everything in rural Japan, which I thought was so interesting because I've never really read about rural Japan. And this was really, really interesting. It was basically little vignettes told about like very specific subjects, and then it would have like nice little illustrations too. The only thing that I would say about this is if you know basically anything about Japan, this book is going to be very repetitive. Like this is the very, very basis of Japanese culture, and like, yeah, again, if you know anything about Japan, this probably isn't going to be super interesting. I also do wish that the like vignettes kind of like went together a little bit more, because it really was very, very like separated. Like none of her stories really connected to each other. At least I didn't find that they did. So overall, I did enjoy this, but yeah, it's a little bit, I'd recommend this for people who don't know about Japan at all, and I give this a 3-star. Next up, I read Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and this was fantastic. This is the memoir by the woman who was raped by, at like the Stanford thing by Brock Turner, and she basically tells her side of the story. It is so, so wonderful. It is so good. It goes basically from the night that he sexually assaulted her through the trial, but then it also goes a lot into after the trial and what her court case basically meant for all women, not just herself. And again, I just think this is absolutely beautiful. I think any woman can read this book and really relate to it and like feel so much for Chanel. And yeah, I just thought this was so enlightening, especially because she was very much kept anonymous throughout the entire court hearing and trial and everything, to the point where I didn't even know that she is a Chinese American woman. I feel like they definitely never talked about her race or anything like that when talking about this court case, or anything about her actual life. So just learning more about her and kind of the life behind this Emily Doe kind of persona that was being told to the media and the world was really, really interesting, and I just thought this was beautiful and absolutely heartbreaking. So love this, gave it 5 stars. Next up, we have a book that will definitely be on my favorite books of the year. I'm just like everyone else, okay? Literally everyone read this book in the last couple of months, and it's on everyone's favorite books of the year list, but whatever. That is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I do not have a good relationship with V.E. Schwab. I have DNF'd or 1-starred every single book by her besides Vicious. And this book, because this book was obviously 5 stars. Basically, if you somehow don't know what this book is about Addie LaRue, who sells her soul to the devil and basically accidentally gets wrapped up in this kind of curse where she is made immortal, but people can't remember her. So she lives forever and stays at, like, I think she's 23 years old. She stays at 23 years old forever, but no one will ever be able to remember her. So it makes her life very, very difficult, obviously. And yeah, it goes back and forth between, I think, 2014, like, so present day, and then 1700s in France. So I just thought this was so, so beautiful. I loved where she went with it. I thought the kind of plot twists and stuff were so excellent. She went in the direction that I did not expect. Like, there was a point that I went, oh crap, if it's this, it's stupid. And it wasn't. And she just did so well. These characters are so beautiful and wonderful. The story is so heartwarming and this weird, almost nostalgic feeling. Like, I've never read this book, but it almost gave me this feeling of nostalgia, which was really interesting. And the ending is absolutely amazing. I loved this book so, so much, and I highly recommend it. I know obviously not everyone has been actually loving it. I know a lot of people really hated this book, but I personally just absolutely adored it. It was wonderful. I know some people keep calling this fantasy. I would not call it fantasy. I would call it like literary fiction with a slight fantastical twist, because it's very modern day and just normal, besides the fact that she lives forever and people forget her. Like, that's basically the only fantasy part of it. It takes place in New York City. So, like, I don't know. It's like, I don't like fantasy, which is why I want to point that out, that I don't think this should be marketed as fantasy. So if you don't like fantasy, don't think like you're not gonna like this book. Next up, I read The Nesting by C.J. Cook. I feel like a lot of us picked up this book because Gabby Reeds absolutely raved about it on her channel. And I was really interested because, like a lot of us, I really like Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, and this kind of sounds like it. Basically, we follow a girl who's a bit down on her luck. She deals with depression, and she is on a train, and she sees this girl who's applying for this job, so she decides to steal this girl's identity and apply for the job, and she gets it, and she moves to Norway and becomes a nanny for these little kids in this kind of weird, creepy house where their mom died. And it sounds so cool, but nothing fucking happens in this book. Nothing. There is not a single thing that happens in this book. Like, the ending, like, the climax of the book literally happens in 7 pages, I think I checked. Like, it's genuinely under 10 pages at the very, very, very end of the book. Nothing else happens. Nothing. It's not creepy. It's not suspenseful. Nothing is interesting or happening about it. The only people I would recommend this for is if you're just really fucking scared of houses. Like, I kind of say that I'm not a person who I find houses scary, but like, if you are a person who thinks houses are scary, if they're like haunted or like someone died there, you'll love this. But like, other than that, it's not a good book. I gave this like a 2-star. The next book I read is a manga that I keep saying I'm shocked no one is talking about this yet, and that is I Had That Same Dream Again by Yoru Sumino, who wrote I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, which was a huge book a couple of years ago. It was one of my favorite books of like 2018, and yeah, I read this one, which is his or her, I don't actually know the gender of this author, their new manga, I guess that's out. There's also a novel version of it. And yeah, this one was really cute. It was not as good as I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, but it was really cute. Basically, we follow a young elementary school girl who is given the assignment in school to define what happiness means to her. And basically, while she's trying to figure this whole story out, we get to meet her different friends. So she has a school friend who is currently not going to school anymore because his father tried to rob a grocery store. And he just feels a lot of shame about this and being poor. And then we also meet her different friends, including a young girl she meets on a roof who's from like high school, who is dealing with depression. Then there's also a woman who is dealing a lot with her sexuality and also depression. And then an older woman who she's friends with. And this is really, really cute. I personally thought the kind of twist was very obvious, but I didn't think that really mattered in this case. I think it still got its point across and it still had an impactful meaning to it. But I give this a 4.25 out of 5 star. I think it's really, really cute, very, very wholesome, but it just didn't hit as hard as I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. So still very good, still highly recommend. Next up, I read a book for class, and that is The Best We Could Do by T. Bui, and this was for my graphic narrative class. I've actually already read this book in the past, but basically this is an autobiographical graphic memoir in which T. Bui basically goes into her family history and talks a lot about her parents immigrating to America and then her and her siblings' lives while they've been here. And this is a fantastic graphic narrative. I would definitely highly suggest it if you're interested. I gave this a 4.25 out of 5 stars. And then for my Milton class, we read Paradise Regained and Samson Agonistes. These two were fine. Again, I just am not loving Milton as much as I might if I wasn't doing it for a class. Paradise Regained is Paradise Lost's like sequel, and it follows Jesus. It is Luke book 4 is basically what it is. But he managed to take like 2 paragraphs and make it into a 1,000-line long poem, and it was stupid and I didn't like it very much. And then we also read Samson Agonistes, which follows Samson Agonistes, who I think is a character in mythology or something. I don't really know, but yeah, and stuff. I don't know. I can't explain this to you. I don't really care enough to. I gave it like 2.5, 3 stars. And then I finally finished The Anatomy of Dreams by Chloe Benjamin. This is a book that I started back in like August, and I had to put it down because I had a whole bunch of books I needed to read for my thesis. But I finally finished this book. And unfortunately, I think I'd only give this book 3 stars, which is unfortunate because the author wrote one of my favorite books of the year, which is The Immortalist. This, I would just say, is a very, very ambitious novel. Especially a first novel. Basically, we follow 2 people who are working at this research lab that focuses on dreams, and we kind of flash back and forth from their childhood to when they're working in like present day, and also to when they were like getting together and stuff like that. So it's kind of about their romance, kind of about their work in these dreams and everything. Again, I just think this was a very ambitious novel, and I think this one bothered me a lot more than The Immortalist. This had the same problem as I think a lot of people have with The Immortalist, that it seems like it should go into some magical realism or fabulism or fantasy, and it just doesn't. So it just is, it kind of leaves you feeling a little unsatisfied, and it's just kind of like, what's the point? And it's also a little bit like boring without that little actual magical twist. So unfortunately, I just ended up not liking this one nearly as much as her first book, and I thought it was just okay. So 3 stars. Then I listened to one of the biggest books on my shelf that I'm so happy I just finally got to it, and that is Free Food for Millionaires by Min-Jin Lee, who a lot of people know as the author of Pachinko. I tried to read Pachinko back when it first came out, actually, and I really didn't like it, but I hate generational stories. I just find them so boring and just not my type of story, so I kept saying that I wanted to check out something else by Min-Jin Lee that's not the generational story. So I picked this one up, which basically follows several different people in New York City who are all kind of connected in some ways through family and friends, and they are all Korean Americans. And we follow a lot of different characters. Like, it is very difficult to kind of come up with a synopsis for this book. But we follow some really, really rich people. We follow some really, really poor people. We follow a couple of romances. We follow a couple of affairs. I think this, if you really enjoy like K-dramas or like soap operas, you'd really, really like this. Just lots of characters, lots of drama and angst just constantly happening, and everyone is connected. That's the best way to describe it. A K-drama or a soap opera, for sure. But I did really end up enjoying this, and I gave it a 4, maybe 4.5 stars. I thought it was just so entertaining and so much fun, and just a great, great book. Next up, also for my graphic narrative class, we read They Called Us Enemies by George Takei, who is a person on Star Trek. He is Sulu from Star Trek, and he wrote this graphic memoir. It's actually based on one of his TED Talks, I believe. And yeah, I read this for class and actually did a whole presentation on it, and I absolutely loved this book. I think it was so well done, and it hit everything that I think it should have. So I think when I first finished it, I gave it like a 4, 4.5 star, but now that I've worked with it and sat on it for longer, I definitely would give it a 5 star, and I highly, highly recommend it. Basically, George Takei actually experienced the Japanese internment camps in America, and he and his family were there the entire time like that they existed. He was a very, very young boy, so he kind of talks about how as a kid he really didn't understand what was happening. He just kind of thought of it as like a vacation, and then as he got older he really wanted to learn more about what had happened and what had happened to him and his family. But as America likes to do, America basically rewrote history and erased the Japanese internment camps from our history, because he talks a lot about as a teenager and young adult he went to libraries and stuff to try to find more information on the Japanese internment camps and couldn't find any because, again, America just likes to cross out things that we did wrong. And he talks a lot about his own experiences at the camp and what he remembers, but also what his father remembers, because he talked to his father. And he, of course, brings it back all the way to present day, where he talks about how these internment camps are currently happening, but with Mexican-American children. I just thought this page was so incredibly powerful, and that's what I talked a lot about in my presentation. And again, I just think this was so, so well done, and I'm so happy this exists and he did this, because as a celebrity, obviously he gets a lot more attention for things that he creates and puts out into the world, so I'm really happy that he kind of took advantage of his position to be able to talk about this very, very important topic. Next up, I read a book for my Patreon, and that was Hard Times by Charles Dickens, which I'm not going to talk too much about. I know I got a comment saying that I'm trying to sell my book reviews because I don't want to talk too much about my Patreon books on Goodreads or YouTube, and that is because I do not think it's fair for people to pay for content for me to just put the same content out a couple weeks later. I just don't think that's fair. I wouldn't want that to happen to me. So yeah, if you want to know my full review on this book, you can follow me on Patreon. I'm not trying to sell you guys my reviews, but I just don't think it's fair for me to come on here and give you guys the exact review that I gave my Patreon. So all I'm going to say about this book is I enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4-star. I think it's really interesting, and I really, really loved the character of Louisa. And that's all I'm going to tell you guys. Next up, I read a whole bunch of short books. I actually read the shortest books on my TBR, and I put up a vlog for it just the other day, so you can check that out if you're interested. But the first book that I read was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam, and this is a book that I feel like has been on every list of like best books of 2020, and I 100% agree. I give this a 5-star. It will probably be on my favorite books of the year list. I absolutely loved it. I'm so happy I read it. Haley recommended me this book, being like, I think this is going to be a Kate book, and she was absolutely right. This has everything. It hits every single mark of a book that I love. This, I would say, is the best terror I have ever read in my life. I have talked quite a bit about it, that if you ever take a Gothic literature class, they talk about how terror and horror are not the same thing. Terror is the build-up to horror. So it's the spooky music and walking down a dark hallway, and then horror is the jump scare. That's the difference between the two. And I would say that this is the best terror I have ever read in my life. I was so unsettled and so uncomfortable and so confused for the majority of this book, and I thought it was fantastic. I love this so much. I love the writing style of this book. I love how uncomfortable it is, but also how real it is and kind of stream of consciousness, which I also love. The writing might be some of my favorite writing I've ever read ever. And again, this book was fantastic. It also has deer. And it's kind of in a horror way. What more could you ask for? This is literally my perfect book. So yeah, you'll be seeing this again pretty soon on my favorite books of the year list. And then I read Miss Ice Sandwich by Mieko Kawakami. This is the author who wrote Breast and Eggs, which I read earlier this year. Unfortunately, I didn't care too much for this book. I didn't care too much for Breast and Eggs, and I didn't care that much for this one. I thought that this was very cute and wholesome. Basically, we follow a little boy who's obsessed with this woman who sells sandwiches, and you know, it talks about him and his friends at school. Very kind of stream of consciousness, and that's about it. Like, nothing, I don't know. Maybe if you like really got a big moral message from this book, you'd like it a little bit more, but I didn't. I just thought it was fine. So I give it like a 3, maybe a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then I read Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin, and this is translated from Spanish. And I have been recommended this book so much, and I was super interested in it, so I finally decided to pick it up, and I really, really liked it. This is basically told in a kind of stream of consciousness, nightmarish kind of way. Basically, the story is told by this woman who is dying. Like, she is on her deathbed, and she's talking to this little boy who is sitting by her bedside, and the back basically says, a young woman named Amanda lies dying in a rural hospital clinic. A boy named David sits behind her. She is not his mother. He is not her child. And basically, this book is a really interesting look at humans and humans' effect on the world and the environment in a very, very weird and terrifying way. I would say if Murakami I would describe as feeling like you're in a dream, this felt like you're in a nightmare the entire time. And I thought it was so well written and so interestingly done, and I really, really enjoyed it, so I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then the last book I read for that kind of, you know, like shortest books on my TBR video was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, and this is also for NonFiction November. So yeah, I really love this. This is a essay collection geared towards YA readers, so young adult and teenage readers, about being queer and black. And it is his kind of memoir, It's called The Memoir Manifesto. So it's his memoir, but also kind of his advice and his teachings through his own experiences. And I thought this was wonderful. I'm so happy stuff like this exists for young queer teens nowadays, because I didn't have this when I was growing up. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this, and I think he did it so well, and I really love that it's specifically targeted towards teens and young adults, because we need more of that. Also, this cover is gorgeous, and yeah, I love the intersectionality. I love the conversation about gender and sexuality. It was so good. So I give that like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. And then I read the big one. I read A Promised Land by Barack Obama. This is volume 1 to his memoir. A lot of people didn't know that it's gonna be 2 volumes. Yeah, this is like almost 800 pages and he still didn't manage to tell his entire story. I think that's my only complaint, is it's not long enough because it cuts off pretty abruptly. Like when it stopped, I was like, what? Like that's it? Like that's the end? So I'm definitely eagerly anticipating the second book in this, or second volume in this book, I guess. But basically in this memoir, Barack Obama talks a lot about his time in politics. He doesn't go into that much about his childhood and stuff. Like, I wouldn't compare it to Becoming by Michelle Obama. Michelle talks a lot more about her childhood and her education before the White House. In this book, Barack really doesn't. He really, like, kind of sets the stage and then goes right into politics, and, like, starts with him working in like small organizations, going up to the Senate, and then becoming president, and what he does at each of them. He goes a lot into the campaign, and he talks a lot about things that, like, you know, we saw happening, but like we obviously didn't know the behind the scenes of, kind of. I love this so much. I love Obama so much. I miss him so much. So yeah, I thought this was fantastic. I'm so excited for the second volume. And yeah, it was great. I give 5 stars. Good job, Obama. And then I read another book for my graphic narrative class, and that is This Is How You See Me by Jamie Hernandez. This is a book that I finished. I didn't feel super strongly about, and then I went to class and I ended up hating this. That happened last month too. Basically, I had no clue that this author was a man. And I think that changes this story a lot. Basically, in this book, we are following a fat, queer woman. And it's written by a man. That just rubs me the wrong way, and it makes me very uncomfortable, because reading it thinking it was by a woman, it feels very much more empowering and very much more like acknowledging women and their identities. Reading it knowing it was written by a man, it definitely you can just see the male gaze a lot more. Everything that kind of felt empowering feels a lot more sexualized after that. And we had a very long conversation about why that is, and I thought it was really fascinating. But yeah, definitely made me hate this book a little bit, so I give it 1 star. Yeah, write about your own identity, okay? But anyways, that is all that I read for this month, the 21 books that I read this month. But anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed this wrap up, and definitely tell me down below if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. And anyways, I love you all, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye!